can't mark a date and believe that that day you can turn it on. It's not about the date. It's about the commitment to yourself. It's about dating your purpose. It's about marrying yourself to your goals. It's about realizing that there is no one coming to save you but you. You have to be willing to put in the work. You must be willing to walk into success. You must be able to run past doubt. You must be able to go through the barbed wire of self-doubt and deprecating words that you have placed over yourself and tried to play it off like it was a joke when in reality you truly believe that you don't deserve things. It's time now for you to speak life over yourself.
Losing. Most of you hear losing and it makes you cringe, it makes you afraid, you fear being embarrassed, you fear being judged, you fear looking like an idiot in front of a bunch of people that won't matter to you in 5 years. But here's the thing, being willing to fail, being willing to lose, will create such a competitive advantage for you because most people can't do it. Most people can't be seen falling on their face. So our options are to stay the same or to actually be willing to fail.
This is your time. You have greatness in you, and everything that happens to you, I've come to know. Some things happen to you, some things happen for you.
And that is what I do. And that is what you can do too. If you have something to change, if you want to change something, change it. Change it now.
Hi, everyone. We have Austin Stout today with me. And hi, Austin. Welcome to the Soul Rocker podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So I'm excited to have you. So first of all, I always like to kind of let my guests know like how I know them, and basically I've just been following you on Instagram and also YouTube. I know you're really active on YouTube as well, so
Yeah. Yep.
yeah. And so as we start diving in here, I'm really interested in knowing a little bit of your background as far as like, even if you were into any sport prior to like lifting, bodybuilding, and then sort of how did you get into like bodybuilding?
Yeah, sure. So, I originally started weight training for sports, like a lot of people probably did. Um, I started I was probably, I don't know, maybe 15 or 16, I would say, for wrestling. So that was my primary sport. I was a wrestler. And then I was, eventually I had started seeking some nutrition information because obviously that's a sport that has a weight requirement, right? So they're weight classes. So,
Mhm.
I wanted to try to do things um, in a better way than most of the kids were doing them at the time, right? So what I found was a lot of the information that I was coming across was written by bodybuilders. So it was either magazines, like fitness magazines or bodybuilding magazines or certain websites. Obviously, online was a little more limited at that time. So
Mhm.
that's where I got interested in that space because I was like, all right, well, these people know something, right? So I kind of investigated that further, and that led me to doing my actual first competition. I started preparing for my first competition. I was still in high school. So I was a senior in high school. I was literally, bringing all my weighed food, to
Oh my
school lunch
God.
and everything. Right. So,
Yeah.
I was, yeah, so of course, very, very misunderstood as a teenager, but that's kind of what led me into the space. I started with personal training, like a lot of people back, especially at that time, because online coaching really wasn't very prominent. Then I
Mhm.
started helping people online, and that kind of blossomed into what it is today.
Wow. Oh, that's impressive and interesting. So how many I guess how many competitions have you done, and then what division have you competed in?
Yeah, so I have, let's see, I might be missing, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I might be missing one here or there, but I think probably 12 or 13.
Okay.
I would say, from ranging from 2009 to now. My last one, and I've had gaps in there where I've taken long off seasons and tried to, go up a weight class or something like that.
Hmm.
But my last one was in December. I did the NPC Nationals last December. I was a light heavyweight, which caps off at 198 pounds. I can just barely make that class. Um, but my first competition, I think I was like 148 pounds. So that's a lot of years, obviously, talking
Yeah.
2009 to 2022.
Yeah, that's a lot. And I know I'm sure you've um have learned a lot. So speaking of I didn't even do a minor introduction of like what I guess what are you currently doing now?
Yeah. So more about, you mean on the business side?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So like I said, I started as a personal trainer back in, really right out of high school. And I was actually going to college I was taking classes at the time. So I had a full-time course load. I was, had this personal training job and so on. And my original major was in the health sciences. So I was either thinking like physical therapy or something along those lines. Uh, I hadn't picked a major yet. I'd also considered psychology because that's something that I'm really interested in. But fast forward a little bit, I was noticing that people were obviously had this need for nutritional service, and I really, as a trainer at the time, really wasn't my position. So I kind of started to learn more, and I transitioned my actual major to nutrition. And by the time I had graduated college, it was already my full source of income. My business was, and then fast forward even more, and now I'm really, really heavily involved in the functional health space. So I do work with a lot of bodybuilders, but I also work with a lot of functional health cases. So we're talking like gastrointestinal, so digestion, hormones, menopause, autoimmune diseases, you name it. I've probably done it. And I'm an educator too, so I educate a lot of coaches. I have about 25 to 30 coaches at any given time that I helping with their education and their business. So that's where my business is at currently.
Yeah. Awesome. That's amazing because we definitely don't see that a lot. So yeah, thank you so much for everything that you're doing. And one of the things that I noticed that you do often, like on your Instagram, YouTube, is like a Q&As, right? So like you do a lot of just Q&As and kind of diving into different questions. So that's kind of how I want to drive this episode a little bit.
Sure,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. And so I want to start off first with the impact of like alcohol and marijuana usage, specifically to, let's say, you know, people who are both like training, but also like for sleep and rest recovery type of, as far as like, especially like marijuana usage, like, you know, how people utilize that for that. So could you
Yep.
just maybe dive in a little bit into that?
Yeah, so I'll cover both. So, excuse me. So as far as alcohol goes, there are, anything in moderation, I suppose, because some of the issues with alcohol will be, for one, it's going to be essentially prioritized in metabolism. So what happens when you consume it is your body wants to prioritize ridding itself of this alcohol because it's essentially a toxin, right? So it's going to kind of push everything else to the wayside, at least temporarily, and really
Mhm.
try to get this alcohol out of your system. So this can cause some issues. It can cause like slowing in motility, which would mean like the actual speed of digestive process of foods and things. It can slow that down, right? It can potentially cause issues with fermentation. So if you've ever heard of like SIBO, people having dysbiosis, you hear that like that term thrown around, like gut dysbiosis, right? So
Yeah.
that's another potential issue with it because it's impeding digestion, and it's stressing this digestive process. That's why if a lot of the time, if you look at, and it can cause like overgrowth of bacteria that we don't want. So like if you look at people that drink regularly, you notice like the person that has the quote unquote beer gut, but they'll have like their limbs, their arms and legs aren't very big,
Yeah. Yeah.
So some of that has to do with the visceral fat and stuff around their organs, of course, but a lot of that actually has to do with like intra-abdominal pressure from all of that gut dysbiosis from like continuously consuming alcohol over and over again. So it does impede sleep. If anyone, people that have drank, I'm sure, or have gotten drunk and tried to go to sleep, like they've noticed this where it'll make them, they'll pass out, right? They're tired, or I should say this, they're relaxed, right? But the actual quality of sleep isn't always good. So as
Right.
far as like interrupting your deep sleep and your REM sleep and maybe not feeling rested after the sleep. So there's a lot of, it's one of those things where as like, if I'm coaching someone, in most cases, having a drink, a drink or two here and there is really not like high priority for me to stop, right? It's like to tell them to stop unless we're specifically dealing with issues revolving around digestion or potentially like their liver, things like that. And then I'm like, okay, well, this might be something that we want to really skip as much as possible early on, right? So for marijuana, that's a tricky one. So people are probably going to get mad at me for this one. So I have not, and just for reference, like I have nothing invested in this. So it's not like I'm for or against any of these things. It's just from the research that we do have and anecdotal evidence, like me, also my observations, like me actually seeing it. And keep in mind, like with like THC marijuana, there's a lot of different strains, right? So like they do slightly different things, or they have slightly different like chemical compositions depending on the strand. And I'm not an
Right.
expert in, I am not an expert in that category at all. So just bear with me on that. But what I will say is most research and most of what I have seen anecdotally, it worsens sleep quality. Now, here's the caveat to that. It helps people sleep because it helps people calm down. Right. So what people mistake, and a lot of medications do this, and there's actually research on them too, is like a GABAergic drug. So like that work on GABA receptors. So for example, like um, Xanax, right? So something that calms you helps with sleep latency, meaning it helps you fall asleep because you're not sitting there thinking about a bunch of stuff that's keeping you awake, right? Like it gets rid of that racing mind, it calms you down, it makes you relaxed, and therefore you can fall asleep. So yes, it improves your sleep quality if you're not sleeping at all. Like obviously it's probably better than like not sleeping at all, right? But if we're talking about, if you took two people that had normal sleep and you gave one THC and one not THC, then the one with THC's sleep quality would probably be worse if you were tracking it. So you can track it on things like Whoop Band or Aura Ring, or like all these tracking devices that are out now. We can literally see this on there. And of course, there's more components to marijuana than just THC, but that's the main, that's the main component that's giving you like a neurological effect, and maybe CBD a little bit. So I would say this, like when I get a lot of people that come in that are using it, right? And a lot. And what I try to tell people is it's not something I'm going to want to try to get rid of right away, but it is something where I'm going to want to try to figure out like they why they started relying on it for sleep in the first place and why they're not able to sleep. Because once we can fix that, they always sleep better without it than with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then if they want to use it during the day, like recreationally here and there, socially, like whatever, that's different. That's not really impacting their sleep.
Right.
So it's a little bit different.
Okay. Yeah, and I asked that because like you said, I see a lot of people who do one or the other or both, and whether it's for sleep or they're doing it and then they're also going to the gym a lot, and I'm just like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like is it even conducive to even waste your time going to the gym if it's really not going to be helpful?
Well, this is where things get a little bit tricky, because I think what is really important to understand about any substance that alters your neurochemistry. So like what caffeine, right? Like caffeine's one, right? Marijuana, alcohol, any psych drug that people are prescribed, like literally, um, I mean, any activity that you like going to the gym alters your neurochemistry temporarily, right? Boosts your dopamine, things like that. So
Right.
anything like that you can build some dependence to it. So or you can do it, you do it because you like it, because it makes you feel good. Like, so someone can say, well, marijuana is not addictive. No, it's not physiologically addictive in the way that like heroin is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you like the way that it makes you feel, and it has some kind of effect on you that you feel you're benefiting from, and therefore what you want to do it, right? So the problem with our population, or this gym population, is a lot of them are kind of addicted personalities anyhow, right?
Yeah.
So what you find is, and it's kind of ironic, is you find that, and I've seen this over the years, that a lot of them have issues with substances. Like not in the way that you think, not in the way that they're like not able to go to work and not able to function, but they have more substance dependence than you would think. And that a lot of that stems down to their personality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty
Yeah.
common.
Yeah, absolutely. And now let's dive into a little bit of reducing injury, and like maybe enhancing opportunities for growth even. So is there like a preferred therapeutic approach that one could focus on? For example, like, deep tissue massages. Nowadays you see a lot of like the ice baths and stuff like that. So is prioritizing sleep and, let's say, stretching and foam rolling sufficient enough?
That's a good question. I mean, I think as a baseline, those recovery modalities like massage and different things, you're going to hear different opinions. So from a science standpoint, a lot of them say they have no efficacy, like they don't really do anything. However, increasing blood flow, like a massage, for example, increasing circulation and making you relaxed, that's helpful. No matter how you slice it, it's still helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's no harm in doing it. Um, but the baseline of everything is really just going to be like trying to manage total stress, that total stress load on your body. Like a body that is really, really, really compromised is more likely to get hurt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're going to the gym 6 days a week and beating yourself up in the gym, but you're only sleeping 5 hours a night, well, you, no amount of massage is going to save you. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
you're putting yourself at risk because you're probably inflamed. You're probably, your body is stressed out. Your adrenals are taxed, like, so your cortisol is all over the place, and you're just not at a very good place to repair from training. So that's one thing. Not overtraining. A lot of people, overtraining is pretty difficult. Like you'd have to train quite a bit, but um, the term below that we would call overreaching, which is like, which would essentially mean that you're starting to burn out, but you're not debilitated. Like you can still force yourself to do it. I think a lot of people kind of operate in that realm all the time. They're like on that edge. They're like on that
Yeah.
like ragged edge all the time. Yeah, I mean, chance of getting hurt probably goes up. Other simple things like exercise selection, like understanding, not just understanding how to do the exercise, but also understanding like not every exercise suits every person's body mechanics. So if you are if you're a female and you're overly tall, like you're taller than average, maybe you're like 5'10", well, your body mechanics, the length of your legs and things like that, that's totally different than a woman that's 5'2", right? So it might feel weird for you to squat with a barbell on your back or something because of how long your legs are, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes just different, like understanding like what movements feel good and what movements suit your mechanics is helpful. But yeah, so those are basic things. And if you really want to get into other recovery modalities, then I think they're all helpful, honestly. Like, here's the thing. I think anything that you enjoy and makes you happy and releases stress is helpful, no matter what. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what the science says. Like, if you feel better, then it's working, So,
Yeah.
there are like ice baths you mentioned. I know they're super popular right now, right? Like everyone's doing like, how long can I stay in the ice bath? Now for weight training, for building muscle, I don't think those are the best thing to do, because you could probably do it on like away from your training sessions. I would probably maybe not do it around your training, because training is inflammatory and that's like part of the literal muscle growth process. So I wouldn't want to like go train and then jump in the ice and like blunt all the inflammation from my training sessions. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That would not be very helpful. So that I do something called, I have a friend that does neurosomatic therapy, which is like kind of a massage. It's a manual therapy, but it's unique in that it really finds the roots of referral pain. So what that means is that when you get a massage, like you're like, oh, my lower back hurts. Well, what's the massage therapist do? They massage your lower back, right? Right. Whereas he is finding the referral source of the pain. So like, hey, the front of my shoulder hurts. Well, actually, the muscle that's tight, that's pulling against it, is like on your back somewhere. Has nothing to do with the front of your shoulder. So it's that's a pretty cool modality to use. That's probably my favorite. Other things for me is I'm so damn busy. Like, I know some people glorify these routines. They're like, I get up and I journal and I do 13 minutes of breathing and then I do this at night. I'm like, shit, I don't have time for that.
Right.
I'm like, the most important thing for me is like getting like 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night,
Yeah.
and trying to keep my mental sanity. Like, if I do those two things, and I'm doing better than 95% of people. But I'm like, I find it funny because I see this a lot too. People get really like hyper vigilant when it comes to these stress relief tactics and recovery things, where they're literally stressing themselves out trying to fit so much of it in their day.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that's kind of defeats the purpose.
The purpose of getting de-stressed. Yeah.
Correct. I see that all the time.
Yeah. And that's actually my next topic is diving a little bit into stress, and when under a high level of like cortisol stress, would perhaps changing workouts be helpful? Because I mean, how effective is our training when we are under a high level of stress? I mean, or would like even certain supplement herbs be beneficial?
So first, I think we could maybe just kind of talk about like what would be the consequences of that stress, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, just so kind of people understand that. And I mean, there's a lot of consequences of stress. I mean, if we really want to really want to sum it up in like a really short statement, stress chronically over time probably contributes to just about every disease or functional health issue that you can imagine. So there's that. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't like it doesn't if there's something that could go wrong, it pretty much is going to contribute to it. So there's that's something important to keep in mind. But specifically in fitness, in like the fitness space or like body composition improvement, weight loss and fat loss and muscle gain, hormonal issues, that's a lot of what we're looking at, digestive issues, potentially like performance issues, like your nervous system being very stressed out and not being able to train the way that you want. So all those things are going to contribute to not really getting the body that you want. Right. So the first thing, and this seems very simple, but it's kind of hard to quantify, is like the very first thing you have to do when someone's perhaps overly stressed and not making the progress they want is just figure out where it's coming from and start reducing the easiest, take the easiest or what we call low hanging fruit and start reducing them. So I'll give you an example. If a person comes in and I see their body's really stressed out, maybe we get some blood work, things don't really look very good, they're not having a regular cycle. Like this is a female, maybe it's just not having a regular menstrual cycle, it's disrupted, she's tired, maybe she has like some thyroid issues or hair loss, like a lot of things could be going wrong, right? And I look at it and like, all right, well, she has a really demanding job, she has a relationship that's kind of been tough, she has some friends that are toxic, she has like some bad habits that she's been doing, she's not sleeping enough. So I'm like, I have to look at that and figure out, well, which of those things is easiest for us to manipulate right away? Right. And some of the stuff we can't do a lot about, or it takes a lot of time to do a lot about. So what's the easiest thing we can change? Training. Right. That's the first and easiest thing that we can start manipulating. So I'm like, all right, well, this woman's going to the gym 6 days a week. Well, I can't have her quit her job right now. Right. So maybe just reducing training load by half, or maybe reducing it by 25% or something, depending on how bad it is our first initial move. That's an easy thing that we can quantify. Like I can put that on paper, right? It's much easier for me to put that on paper than to tell them like, don't be stressed out. Like that doesn't do anything. That's a useless statement. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that kind of stuff, as far as their perceived stress and how they handle things, that's something that we can kind of work on in the background as we reduce their training and as we maybe change their routine, as we get them sleeping more. So we can do those things. And then the actual stress response stuff, I'm just reminding them each week, paying attention to their feedback, positive reinforcement. Sometimes that's me like calling them on their shit, I got to be like, hey, like a lot of the time where people lack is just like purely just recognizing that there's even a problem in the first place.
Yeah.
Because we're all just kind of on autopilot and we're all really busy and we're all just floating through. So when they send me like when I get all this, this blood work and all this stuff that looks terrible and they're like, oh, I'm fine. I'm like, no, not really. Like, no, you think you're fine, but this says otherwise. So it can be a process to kind of like build that self-awareness. And then from there, you can start, reducing stress in other areas of their life and not just training.
Yeah, that was a really, really good example that you shared. Because you often hear, even people are like, well, let me start adding stuff, not even recognizing all the other stuff that you mentioned. And they're just wanting to start adding in like supplements as like the cure for their stress.
Sure. And there's supplementation's fine. Like I use, I mean, I use protocols and things like that, but I would say that at the end of the day, until you understand the root of what's causing your issues, until you can actually build that foundation, and most good functional health coaches are going to tell you this, it's kind of protocols aren't going to do much. And if they do, they're just going to be back to square one again once that protocol's over, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the goal of functional coaching is to address the issue at its root and help someone function the way that they should. Because like, let's say you have I don't know, you have anxiety or depression, you go to the doctor, what do? They give you an antidepressant, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, what if I just have someone come in and they have let's say they're having a digestive issue, and I'm like, all right, well, I have a protocol for this issue, right? But I don't say anything about like why they're having the issue or talk to them about fixing it. Well, we run the protocol, it probably helps, right? It reduces their symptoms, it probably fixes the issue to an extent, but what happens after that's over? 2 months later, they're in the same spot again, right? Because they didn't fix anything.
Yeah.
So at that point, we're not doing a whole lot better than just conventional medicine at that point.
Yeah.
And then
I often hear too, because it does make us feel better, right? So most of the time, most of us like to go to the gym also and work out, and that helps us feel better, I guess, during, in that moment. But is that really fixing the problem too?
Yeah, and that's right. That's the whole takeaway is like I always say this, like I'm like a before and after is super cool, right? Like someone makes they lose body fat or they feel better or I fix their whatever it is. Like I want to know what happens like after the after.
Yes.
Right. And I throw that term around, and people that follow me have heard me say it, but I mean, when I'm like, I always say it's chess, not checkers. Like I'm always thinking steps ahead when I'm doing something, right? I'm thinking like, well, I want to get this result, but I want to maintain this result, or maybe not even maintain it. Maybe after I get the result, I want to be able to get even more results after that. But what if I set the client up? What if I like help them lose body fat with an extreme approach when their body wasn't ready, and then they just rebound and they gain back time and a half what they lost? Like, what's the point?
Right.
Like, it's a sweet before and after on Instagram, but I really did the client a disservice. I didn't fix anything. I didn't teach them the right habits. I didn't set their body up. I didn't have a plan afterwards. I just was like, all right, cool. You lost the weight. Like, good luck.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, and when we diving into like a warm-up, so warm-up protocols, how would one approach one for like upper body and versus like lower body?
Okay. Well, first thing with warm-ups is I I try to tell people not to waste too much energy on warm-ups, but they are important. So what I mean by that is like some people have these like really super elaborate warm-up routines, right? Like they're like 40 minutes or something, like a half hour, right? And okay, well, I think what we have to ask ourselves is, are we just adding, even though the warm-ups are low stress, they're not like high impact like our training, but I'm like, are we just fatiguing ourselves before we even start training, and then like putting ourselves at higher risk of injury by like doing all this extra work and then already being tired? Right. So, and that's like a pretty dramatic example, but my point is like, I think that people that get really, really, really involved in warm-ups probably do too much. And to me, unless you have a specific injury or you have a specific limitation in your range of motion or your mobility, one of the best ways to warm up and is really to start doing the movement that you're doing. So like, for example, if I am doing lower body workouts, because you mentioned that. So I'm doing a lower body workout and my first movement is like squats, right? It's like some kind of squat, barbell squat, hack squat, some kind of machine, Smith machine, whatever. And to me, I want to start building my proprioception. So like my connection with that movement, like that mind muscle connection. So why not, instead of me doing like some weird backwards lunge thing where I'm like upside down and like balancing on a ball and doing like some flossing and wrapping bands around myself, how about I just get under the bar and start opening up my hips and getting everything warmed up, like doing the squat very lightly. Right? Because now I've done two things. I have started to AKA warm up, and I've also like connected myself neurologically with that movement pattern. So to me, like, I'm like, all right, well, I'm just going to add extra sets to the front of the movement as my primary warm up for the most part. Now, that's not to say that you can't do other stuff. I mean, there's a lot of, I would say the rest of it is really going to just depend on like if you're injury prone or if you have specific pre-existing like issues with your mobility, then you can get into like extra warm-ups. The only other thing I really say is like stretching. It's pretty well established, like stretching, like static stretching where you're like holding a stretch, static warm-ups like that. Really probably not the way to go before a workout. Like most research shows that like dynamic warm-ups where you're actually moving, seem to be better to warm up. So yeah, you don't have to squat if you're warming up for squats. You could do some body weight lunges, really like slow and exaggerated, deep range of motion. You can do some type of like, hip circle work with a little band hip circles. There's all kinds of things that you can do. But don't underestimate like just doing extra sets on the movement that you're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
For
sure. Yeah, that's good information there. Now, I also wanted to dive. Now, I know this obviously can go much deeper, but just maybe touching a little bit on like hormone recovery. So from like typically from like things like chronic dieting or maybe even eating disorders, birth control, is there like a similarity between all three of those, for example?
So repeat the question. I want to make sure I'm understanding the question because that was quite a few things.
Yeah, so just basically like, touching a little bit on the hormone recovery, specifically when we're thinking about like, from hormone recovery from like chronic dieting or maybe an eating disorder,
Okay.
kind of a thing.
Yeah. So are there similarities in terms of like how you would approach those?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, you'd be surprised. Actually, there's a lot of similarities. So there's, if you were to, for example, like pull blood work on, or some kind of lab work on each of those cases, you would probably get a different, you'd probably get a different read on each of those. However, the underlying theme is like there's a lot of similarities in the sense that every one of those bodies is really stressed out, right? Okay, so we know that. So like we can just defer back to the stress reduction conversation we had, and those things I'm saying, like that concept's going to apply to every single one of those, no matter what. That's probably going to be a component of each of them, right? The second one is we want to understand are we restoring, if we're restoring hormone function, like they took birth control and the thing about birth control is like nobody takes birth control for a couple months, right? Like it's always taken for years or decades, 20 years or something, right? Long periods of time. And maybe multiple types, even like maybe they've had an IUD for a while and they had a pill for a while, or they had a shot, whatever. So they've been under that stress for a really long period of time. But essentially, outside of the stress reduction piece, like understanding that we're dealing with a system that's kind of like needs to reboot, right? So like if they're in prep, a lot of those, they've maybe lost their menstrual cycle as they've dieted really hard. So like that ovulation and that totality of that menstrual cycle is kind of gone. It's not cycling anymore. They're coming off birth control. Their hormones are perhaps suppressed. They had eating disorder. You see a lot of really low suppressed hormones and eating disorders, right? Because they've been chronically underfed and underweight for like really long periods of time. So all of these are like kind of the same in the sense that we need to reduce stress a lot, and we need to nourish the system by having enough calories, right? So like none of these issues, and this isn't an absolute 110% thing, but usually we don't really want to be in a calorie deficit anytime we're trying to fix any of these, right? We want to at least be at maintenance or a little above maintenance, because it's a repair process. Like if we don't even have enough food to repair, then we're probably not going to repair hormones. Like don't be in a calorie deficit usually. Sleep, stress reduction, micronutrients. So like, plenty of variance in the diet. Like that's one thing that, a lot of these cases run into is if they've been under eating for a long time, they maybe haven't had much variance in their diet. Like if it's pretty easy to have a micronutrient deficiency when you're only eating 1,000 calories or 900 calories for 2 years,
right?
Like, chances are you're probably missing some things, and you probably ate the same like 7 foods the whole time, right? So you could probably eat the same 10 foods if you had 2,000-3,000 calories in your diet, but at 900 probably missing some micronutrients. So varying the diet, fruits and vegetables, varying protein sources, like that's a weird thing. I know I have clients come in sometimes that come from that really like old school, eat the same 4 things, low calories, blah blah, and I start putting like fruit and stuff in their diet. Like what is that? Right? But they feel good, right? Because we're just fixing micronutrient deficiencies. So those are kind of the basics. Like that's where all of those would have something in common, I guess I should say.
Yeah, no, that makes sense for sure. Now, I'm also curious as to how your style in like exercise selection, volume, calories, and any other variables have shifted as an advanced lifter. And I ask that because, well, this is obviously I'm asking relevant to you, but even when we consider like variables that need, that one needs to change in order to make progress, the longer that we are into lifting, and the more it does become difficult to, let's take someone like me who doesn't really have a desire to compete, but certain goals that a competitor has still applies to me. So for me, my approach has been more, I guess you can say moderate, which can lead to a road that's less impressive and that takes a little bit longer. So do you mind sharing like a little bit more about, as an advanced lifter, what kind of things, might be changing, or if you want to share, from your own personal changes?
Sure. I think that as far as the variables that would cause you to grow muscle and lose fat, like those things are the same from advanced to beginner, right? I think the difficulty comes in is like as advanced, when it comes to muscle gain for advanced people, You just need more of those things, meaning like it takes more for you to create an adaptation when you've gained 30 pounds of muscle already and you've been training for 10 years, right? Like when you're a beginner, the dose response, meaning like how much of that volume you need and how much intensity and how much load, like basically everything works. You know what I mean? Like you don't really have to do much and it's all going to work. Now, that dose response changes more and more and more as you get bigger, or as I should say, as you get further away from your natural baseline, like where you're get closer to your ceiling. So for you, for example, if it's, if you've been training for 5 years and you made really good progress, and then kind of like year 3 and 4, it started to slow down, like, oh, you probably need, something needs to improve, and you probably need more of something to create that. Now, the problem with that is that when we do more, we have to recover more. We can't just do more sets and do more weight indefinitely forever without our recovery becoming an issue. So we have to get more care. We have to be more careful with that. We have, in terms of our recovery and how we're treating those things. And another thing that comes in big, I've noticed this a lot for myself. I would consider myself like pretty advanced, I guess. Definitely. I mean, as far as like how long I've been training, I've gained a lot of muscle, probably, 60 pounds or 70 pounds since I started a muscle. But anyhow, my exercise selection has had to change, because if I am doing, like, for example, if I am doing let's say a squat with a barbell, well, if I'm squatting 500 pounds for like 10 reps, it takes a lot of energy for me to unrack that bar and get in position and do it and then put it back on the rack.
Yeah.
How many warm-up sets does it take me to get to that? Right? Like, that's another thing. So I'm thinking, if I only squat 135, it doesn't take me a whole lot. So exercise selection, I think is definitely a big consideration. I have had to step away from things that I kind of like doing, because they were just too taxing. Like, for example, if I do those squats and I do, 3 really hard sets, all out, failure, heaviest weight, my workout's done. I can't do anything else.
Yeah.
I'm spent. Like, everything's like, my nervous system's spent. I don't have any energy left. I can't really do anything else. So like, I've had to do things that are what you would call like more bracing. So for example, instead of doing a squat, maybe I need to get in a machine like a hack squat or something where I can brace myself in there and I can just focus on that target muscle. I'm not wearing out my lower back. I'm not wearing out my midsection. I'm not wearing out my upper back. I can just focus on the leg training, right? So I get more out of it that way.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense.
That's a huge component when you're advanced.
Yeah. All right. That was really helpful. And I guess lastly, just wanted to see if there was anything, I guess, that you're working on, or how can people contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. So is this where I plug stuff?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, I have a lot of things I offer. I offer classes. So I do have a class coming up in 2 weeks, 2 weeks from tomorrow. This is a thyroid course going over thyroid health mechanisms and healing and stuff like that. If anyone's interested in that, you can reach out to me. I have all kinds of classes that I offer. I offer my education for coaches. So if they're a coach that's wanting to expand their knowledge base and expand their maybe like work with different client demographics or improve on things, they can contact me for that. Obviously, I'm like my regular coaching services for anyone. I've worked with all demographics, soccer moms clear up to 300-pound bodybuilders. So everyone, anyone and everyone. And then I know you said you follow my content. I put out a ton of free content on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as well. So the easiest way to find me is on my social media. That'll be Austin ST8, the number 8 on Instagram, and then just Austin Stout on Facebook. And I have a link tree in my bio. So the link tree has like all the links to everything in my email and stuff too.
Yeah. I'll make sure to post all that information in the show notes. So Austin, thank you so much for joining me today. All the information that you provided was extremely helpful, and I'm really, really grateful to have you on the show. Look up to you and all the work that you do. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I enjoyed it.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much.
Yep. Have a great one.